New from Dead Ant Studios, it's the Die Anti video game! Experience life as Anthony in nearly 3 whole action-packed levels!
Hey, wait a minute! This game is great!
Recently I was playing through the hottest new gaming sensation, Animaniacs: The Great Edgar Hunt for the GameCube. This is a 3D platformer based on the Animaniacs franchise, and it isn't very good. Yeah, it's butt ugly, features a frustrating camera, tons of jank, feels very slapped together with repetitive objectives and poorly thought out fetch quests. And I fucking love it. I played the entire thing and had a dumb grin on my face the whole time. It isn't great, but I love it. I like licensed video games, games based on movies, shows, rapper 50 Cent, and so on. I find their existence to be oddly comforting. They may not be great, hell, they may not even be good half the time, but they've been such a staple in gaming for so many years that I can't help but appreciate their presence.
Isn't that just Stockholm Syndrome?
And thanks to the magic of corporate interests, they're sure to outlive us all, even as video games become grander and more expensive to produce. So today I really just want to talk about some licensed games. I don't have any larger point to make here, the topic just interests me, so I feel like rambling, but I'll tie it all together by the end with some sort of contrived theming, I promise. Licensed games have been around longer than many of us, starting way back in the earliest days of consumer gaming. To the best of my knowledge, the first of them all was Star Trek Phaser Strike, which released for the Microvision handheld in 1979.
Yeah, this makes no sense to me. Probably because I'm not into Star Trek.
The genre, for lack of a better word, wasn't as common during what I'm going to annoyingly call the pre-NES era, though it's funny because one of the most notorious Atari games of all time was based on a movie. I'm talking of course about E.T. for the Atari 2600, the game that crashed an entire market. It's honestly pretty metal. This was a product that was rushed out in weeks, with about 5,000 copies printed for every 1 copy sold, and was such a massive critical and commercial failure that it did at least partially contribute to the great gaming crash of 1983. Also, a bunch of copies were buried in a New Mexico landfill, so E.T. also has the honor of very directly contributing to climate change. Look, I've never played this one, and it does seem pretty not good, but this illustrates a major problem with licensed games that still persists today. See, film and television studios aren't commissioning Steven Spielberg movie games out of the goodness of their hearts. No, these games are literally just ad campaigns to them. I don't think I'm shocking the internet by saying any of this, but the issue is that these studios don't care whether or not an ET game is good. They only care about whether or not an ET game will strengthen the ET brand. It's a gross consequence of the over-commercialization of art, and yeah, make no mistake, even the ET game is art. The game's designer Howard Scott Warshaw was a fan of the film and made a legitimate effort to create something both innovative and emotionally resonant with the movie, despite pushback from Spielberg and friends who just wanted the game to be Pac-Man. To be clear, we can't fully absolve Warshaw of blame. Part of the reason why he took on the project in the first place was because he was excited by the challenge of a tight deadline, but it seems likely that had he been given more time and money, E.T. might not have turned out to be the dumpster fire that it was. Either way, the game has you collecting Reese's Pieces. Could it really be that bad? But as gaming entered what I'm still obnoxiously referring to as the NES and post-NES eras, licensed games started becoming more and more common and more revered by fans. Games such as DuckTales, Aladdin, and The Lion King were all so beloved that they eventually received modern re-releases and even a full remake in DuckTales' case. Other classics from this time include Disney's Magical Quest trilogy, Animaniacs for Genesis and Super NES, which were actually 2 different games under the same name, and oh god, don't let me skip over the arcade cabinets! Talk to any arcade aficionados and they're likely to bring up Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time, X-Men Arcade, and The Simpsons. And while I've only played The Simpsons personally, it's solid and captures the feel of the show's first few seasons really well. I have no doubt that the other 2 are worth your time if you're into the beat-em-up genre, as those are apparently the superior titles, and they were all developed by Konami, who also made the SNES and Genesis Animaniacs games. Interesting fun fact, Konami had their grubby paws all over tons of different licenses during these eras. They were also in charge of 1990's Aliens and 1992's G.I. Joe, which were both well-received arcade shooters.
Really? Konami? The slot machine company? The slot machine company.
So while there were solid offerings in the arcades and on the NES, SNES, Genesis, and so on, there were also a lot of Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fools. Yeah, like I said, every game we're looking at today was commissioned by a studio or company in order to strengthen some sort of brand, and we got quite a few of the more egregious examples during this time. Whether it be a series of McDonald's games or one based on that pizza slut the Noid, there were quite a few overt junk food commercial games that deserve a metric ton of scrutiny. I don't want to focus on this topic specifically because then we'd have to talk about Happy Meals and old cartoons and so on, but yeah, even if not all of these snack peddlers were terrible video games, I'm still not very keen on them from a fundamental level, and they represent the reality of what these licensed games really are underneath it all. But ethical complaints aside, time marches forward, and in the mid-90s, video games went through a drastic shift, transitioning from being flat 2D affairs to chunky 3D ones. Whenever I think about the PS1 N64 era, licensed games never come to mind. I usually jump right to Mario and Crash and whatnot, one, but that doesn't mean they weren't around. There were tons of them coming out. This is when we got Mickey Speedway USA. I liked that game, but that's the only one I ever immediately think of, and it's more due to nostalgia than anything else. So despite these systems hosting other examples, there's just not much I really want to talk about here. But before moving on, I do have to acknowledge two extremely important license games, both N64 exclusives. Let's get the trash out of the way first. Superman: The New Superman Adventures, which I am now learning is the actual title for Superman 64. I played this game as a kid with very low standards, and even back then I fucking despised it. I couldn't get past the first level, so for all I know, this is a game where you fly through rings and nothing more, with some of the worst controls you could possibly imagine.
Let's move on!
But then there's GoldenEye 007, developer Rare's second most acclaimed game, after Mickey Speedway USA, of course. This GoldenEye, I mean not Mickey Kart, is one of the most important games ever made, and its impact on the medium can still be seen to this very day. I've never played it. Yeah, I know some of you might scoff at the 25-year-old chump who grew up with the N64 yet never played GoldenEye, but let me explain. Not only did I not have many friends during my early childhood, but I wasn't allowed to hang out with the few that I did. Basically, when I played video games during my youth, I either played them alone or with my sister, and as little elementary tykes, we had no interest in a game based on a movie franchise that we knew nothing about. And now that I'm older, yeah, it's definitely one that I'll try out eventually, but while it was hugely influential and helped birth modern home console shooters, it's also quite archaic by today's standards thanks to the limitations of the N64's hardware and controller. But either way, I am a sad loser for never playing it, I acknowledge that. But now we're stepping out of the N64 PS1 days and into the wild world of the GameCube, Wii, PS2, Xbox 360. You get the idea. Pretty much 2001 to 2013. Holy cow, licensed games went off their fucking rocker at this point. It's impossible to even scratch the surface without going on and on, but if a movie or show was coming out in the 2000s, a game was certain to follow suit. This was undoubtedly the height of licensed gaming based purely on quantity, and a lot of them were decently fun as well. Hell, I still play The Simpsons hit and run occasionally. A lot of the Nicktoons and Cartoon Network stuff was solid. Superhero games such as the Batman Arkham series and some Spider-Man titles were high quality. Kingdom Hearts is technically licensed, but saying that makes me feel uncomfortable, so let's move past it. And of course, the game that inspired this whole shebang, Animaniacs: The Great Edgar Hunt. That's right, I bet you didn't think we were gonna come back to Animaniacs: The Great Edgar Hunt, but f you, I'm the one that wrote this script. I knew. Not a lot of people talk about The Great Edgar Hunt, and for good reason. Aside from being objectively mediocre, it also didn't receive a wide release. It only came out on the GameCube in North America, with lucky Europeans getting PS2 and Xbox versions.
Don't ask how I got mine!
In addition, this was an odd bugger of a release. This thing came out 6 years after the Animaniacs series first ended, you know, before being revived on Hulu in 2020, and it even brought together the entire main voice cast from the show. It must have been wild being a fan back then, hearing these characters interacting for the first time in years. And look, as a game, it isn't great, but I love it for two main reasons: the humor and the character movement. The dialogue is legitimately funny, with moments that perfectly capture the irreverence of the show. And as for the movement, it's just honest fun controlling the Warners. Being able to triple jump in the air completely breaks the game, and it's really cool to hop all around collecting things for that simple reason. It's not an essential platforming experience, it didn't reinvent the wheel with 3s instead of E's or anything, but it's a solid good time nonetheless. And I think it illustrates what I like about a lot of licensed games from this era. They were often decently good times, but with some standout qualities. I already mentioned The Simpsons Hit and Run, which is pretty repetitive, but did an amazing job of combining GTA and Springfield. I can kick Marge for hours. There's also Ed, Edd n Eddy The Miss Ed Ventures, which replicates the music, sound effects, and style of the cartoon in a way that wildly elevates the experience. Like, this is a game that only works because the uniqueness of the Ed's world is attached to it, otherwise it's just okay. But the absolute cream of the crop for this era of licensed games, at least to me, has to be SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. Like a lot of the licensed games from this period, this is a 3D platformer, but it manages to be more distinct than some of its competitors. For one, it wasn't made to coincide with any specific SpongeBob episode, it's a purely standalone story. It's also solidly built, runs super smooth, and I think it's aged quite nicely both mechanically and visually. But more importantly, this is just a good platforming experience that wonderfully replicates the charm of Bikini Bottom from a team that clearly knew and cared about what they were doing. The levels feel well thought out, most main objectives are fun, the characters are all perfectly written, even some of the weaker elements like the boss fights still work due to their stellar presentation. This is not a perfect game, but it does so many things right, and it's still one of my favorites all these years later. It even got fully remade in 2020. The remake isn't as good. But once we enter the PS4, Xbox One, Wii U era, and up until the present day, it definitely feels like the release of licensed games has become a bit less common. Don't get me wrong, they still exist. Did you know that an Ice Age 3D platformer starring Scrat the Squirrel came out in 2019 and apparently it's not terrible? But yeah, these games are definitely less ubiquitous than they were just a decade ago. As I mentioned earlier, games are becoming more expensive to produce, and since licensed titles were always designed to be simple cash grabs for studios to attach their properties to, it seems clear that they're less willing to do that now that the cost of entry has dramatically increased. There are obviously exceptions. The aforementioned DuckTales and Battle for Bikini Bottom remakes, Alien Isolation, which is an incredible survival horror experience, Jedi Fallen Order, some of the LEGO games, though everybody loves LEGO City Undercover and I just couldn't stand that one. The second South Park RPG, I guess Kingdom Hearts 3, and of course Spider-Man for PS4, a game so good that you can make the argument that it's the very best licensed game, period. I've also never played that one. I know, I have no credibility. But yeah, while I'd say that the great licensed games have only gotten better in modern times, I don't know, I kinda miss the likable mediocrity that we'd see on the GameCube. There just isn't as much of that anymore. I mean, I guess Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 counts, but I feel like the only licensed games we get these days are either really fantastic or Garfield Kart. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about fantastic games. I like fantastic games as a matter of fact, but in terms of licensed stuff, those will always be few and far between. Like, most film franchises don't come with their own Alien Isolation. And like I said, there really was something comforting about the overabundance of just okay film and TV tie-in games from the 2000s, and it sucks to me that they're quickly becoming a relic of the past. But let's be real for a second. If all of those games disappeared from the face of the earth in a tragic bus crash or something, not a lot of tears would spill. They're not great games, obviously, but why does that matter? They're entertaining and enjoyable and fun. I feel like everyone around my age has a favorite licensed game from the past 20 years or so that isn't good, but is perfectly acceptably fine. Some people might prefer the Nicktoons series, others might have an affinity for Epic Mickey, some might have a soft spot for Rugrats Royal Ransom, and others might lose the respect I have for them. So it's still a bit of a shame to see these being made less and less as time goes on, even if they're not exactly games that are worthy of much more defense. At the end of the day, licensed games have been a staple in the gaming world for decades, and it's been crazy to see them evolve. They've given us their rare highs, their less rare lows, and tons and tons and tons and tons of games in between. But I'll always have a soft spot for them, except for Finding Nemo and LEGO City Undercover and a bunch of others. There really are so many bad ones. So I did it! I tied things together at the end, just like I promised I would. But I wrapped things up without mentioning a bunch of notable titles like Ghostbusters, The Witcher 3, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, The Walking Dead, the f***ing Burger King games. I didn't even mention any modern handheld titles. The internet is gonna eat me alive for this video. Goodbye!